Victory lane at Indianapolis. That's why we go racing.
I can't imagine what it would feel like, and I just hope one day I have the pleasure to feel that.
I've been, closed a few times and no cigar, so it would be nice to get that cigar.
I think all across the world, when you ask somebody if they could win just one race, where would it be? They would say Indianapolis, and it's no different for myself. Even with all the different types of cars I run, Indy's the one I want to win.
I've been racing since I was a kid, 10 years old, and I've had one objective. I mean, to win races is great, but to win the Indy 500 is even greater. It's just a special event, and that's what we're all here for, is really to win that race.
Man, I would just love to win that race for a second time. I might never win it again because Indy is Indy. So many factors are involved, but it would mean a great deal for me.
I think the goal is to win the Indy 500 again. I mean, to me, that's just the best thing you could ever experience, and that's my goal.
ESPN Speed World welcomes you to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the eve of the 81st running of the Indy 500. We're going to recap the month of May 1997 before they go green. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Jenkins, along with Jan Beekes, who has been here almost every day to report the activity. This has been a very interesting, somewhat controversial year. It began with the rookies supposedly being on the track the first day, but the weather had something to say about that.
That's right, Bob. On the first day, they had rain on Saturday, and these rookies did not have a chance to hit the track until Sunday. That put a little additional pressure on them. A nice crop of rookies. Out of the 11 rookies that went to the rookie breakfast, 10 had rides.
Some of the names we weren't familiar with. For instance, Vincenzo Sospiri. This man is from Italy, living in Monte Carlo, a test driver for Formula One last year, but he took quickly to the 2.5-mile oval.
He also did some running in Formula One this year. He had a pretty good ride with the Lola team, but unfortunately, they ran into financial difficulties, so he got a nice ride here.
Quickly up to 211.9, Jeff Ward comes to the IndyCar ranks from the world of motocross. He's used to two wheels, but in just a few laps, his car owner Eddie Cheever saw him reach over 205 miles an hour.
Of course, he was one of the drivers that only had to do a refresher, just had to run 2 of the top phases that the rookies go through here because he had been to the Speedway before.
Jeff Ward in the race at Orlando, substituting for the injured Davy Jones. Kenny Breck then took over the Gallus team ride, and here's another young man we weren't familiar with. He comes to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway through the Formula 3000 ranks.
And has had a lot of experience driving with guys like Vincenzo Sospiri and others that are here, and he was just coming off a big crash, Bob, in Texas, so for him, it was like getting back on the horse.
And he and the Gallus team put in a lot of laps on this racetrack, so he could very definitely be a contender tomorrow. Well, while the rookies were on the Speedway, the veterans were out west on the USS Nimitz.
Oh, spectacular. It was pretty cool. It exceeded my expectations by 100 times.
At a younger age, if I was exposed to something like that, I wouldn't be surprised if I spent some time in the Navy. It was great just to see how everything is choreographed on this carrier.
He's the actual one in charge of these 2 catapults for up here on the bow. He's in charge of making sure these things get launched off correctly.
Heads up. right on the flight deck, watching night ops, watching them land and take off. It was a unique experience.
Normally I'm up here for probably 3 or 4 of the hours extra other than that, especially at nighttime.
During that ballet that we have where we move airplanes, launch and recover, it's the same thing pretty much as the teamwork displayed of the race car drivers when they go ahead and come into their pits. Everybody has a purpose, everybody has a design job, and it's all done for max efficiency. So that's why we saw that we had a lot of similarities.
Looks like fun. ESPN's presentation of Before the Green Flag Drops is being brought to you by Best Buys, just the store you've been shopping for. And by Pennzoil, formulated for today's stop and go driving. Stop, go, Pennzoil. And so the rookies were on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Sunday and Monday, and then the veterans came out on Tuesday. Back for that in a moment. Finishing touches being put on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before the green flag drops. We're here on the eve of tomorrow's race. Well, the rookies had 2 days on Sunday and Monday, and then it was time for the veterans to join them on the track.
And of course, what everyone was looking forward to, Bob, was how fast would they go? Would the testing times be equaled? But here, a guy who didn't test was the fastest on the first day.
Not surprisingly, Arie Luyendyk, who of course won the race in 1990, up to 218.707 in just a few laps of practice.
Of course, that's the engineer Tim Wardroff. He knows how to take the settings from previous years, even though there's a different car, and transfer it to this year's machine.
Robbie Gordon hopes to be the second man in history to drive in the Indianapolis 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 NASCAR Winston Cup race in the same day.
Robbie Gordon, of course, one of those drivers that did do a lot of testing, came in with a lot of confidence, but didn't show as much early speed as Luyendyk.
His car owner in this machine, the same as his Winston Cup car, Felix Savadas. Here's last year's pole sitter, Tony Stewart. A lot of big things expected from this guy tomorrow.
Of course, he and his teammate Robbie Buell, they did the majority of the testing throughout the month of April, and again, they seem to be playing catch-up right out of the box.
214.337, and Tony Stewart was ready to qualify later in the week. How about the defending champion of the Indianapolis 500, Buddy Lazier, returns with the Himmelgarn team.
But he returns this time with an Infinity engine, which a lot of people were concerned. Would it have enough horsepower for the 500 to do the speeds? It turned out it did not have what they were looking for. They already at this stage were thinking about making a change.
Lazier at 214.128 on Tuesday. Scott Sharp, he comes in as the defending co-champion of the Indy Racing League, and he was quickly up to also over 214 miles an hour.
Now, of course, A.J. Foyt had a choice of a G-Force chassis or a Dallara. They had a stable of both. At least at this stage, Scott Sharp was in the G-Force.
Everything was moving rather smoothly, but of course the month would not be without incidents. A lot of people were talking about a large number of blown engines possibly during the month of May, and one blown engine did lead to a crash by a driver on Tuesday.
That's true. Jeff Ward got himself into trouble. What happened here was an oil line came off. He had just left the pits, and you can see the smoke coming from the back of the car. And of course, if the oil gets onto the tires, you can see the stickers were still there, no heat in the tires and oil. But thankfully, he's not going very quick here, so it wasn't a real heavy hit for Jeff.
Yeah, just damage to the rear part of the car, knocked the rear wing off, but Jeff Ward was okay. We'll continue to recap the month of May 1997 from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. ABC Sports will have live coverage of the 81st running of the Indianapolis 500 tomorrow beginning at 11 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC. I'm Bob Jenkins along with Jan Beekes, and we are recapping the 1997 month of May before the green flag drops. Now, the speeds you saw last segment were from Tuesday, but then it was time to dial them in and try to get them to go faster.
It really was. Obviously, there was potential of some rain later in the week. People were not thinking about race setups. Guys like Arie Luyendyk wanted to see if anybody could go 220.
Luyendyk getting prepared to go out onto the racetrack. This was on Wednesday. It was very unseasonably cool and windy most of the month, but Lyondike was ready to see what this car would do.
Tim Wardrop, his engineer, giving him some final instructions. Tim is the kind of guy that'll tell a driver exactly what kind of speed to expect when he hits the track.
And Arie Lyondike found some great speed, over 220 miles an hour, and that became the mark that a lot of drivers shot for throughout the month.
And it was typical Arie. Here he's just beginning that phase of running that quickly, but when he really was on it, he used every inch of the racetrack.
A.J. Foyt, car owner now after winning this Classic 4 times. One of his drivers, Scott Sharp, got in and tried to get it up to speed. Came a little short of 220, but still found a 217.4.
And of course, they were still shaking down the G-force. We've talked about the fact that they had both a Dallara and a G-force to play with. At least at this stage, they like the G-force.
You don't see Arie Lyondike have a problem at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway very much. He has been almost accident-free here in the many years that he has participated. However, he did have a problem one day.
Yes, he was out on cold tires. It got away from him. And here he said when he hit the grass, it was still wet. He doesn't know if it was cold tires, wind, or possible moisture, but he said the grass actually sped him up a little bit and just slight damage on the nose.
This has been an unusual month weather-wise. It seems like it's been so cold that cold tires were a factor in a lot of incidents.
That's definitely the case. John Paul Jr. was another guy that left the pits on cold tires, had difficulty coming through, and unfortunately this is a very, very heavy frontal impact for him, and unfortunately he did suffer some pretty good injuries, unfortunately, with his legs and so on.
That was certainly one of the scariest crashes of the month. The car went into the wall almost head-on, and of course these cars are brand new. We didn't know exactly how crash-worthy they would be. As it turned out, they held up very well.
Yeah, I think so. It's a shame anytime that you break any bones, but of course you have to remember it always could have been worse.
And another incident then happened to Scott Sharp, and this was also very, very hard impact.
It was. This is a case where he is again on cold tires. You can see the stickers on the tires. He thought he needed to pick up the pace a little bit to stay ahead of Zempedri. Then the heavy impact here, which we found out later, pinned the actual throttle cable open. You can see that the engine is still roaring and racing here, and it drove him all the way down to turn number 1.
And unfortunately, the injuries that Scott Sharp suffered in that crash would prevent him from participating in this year's Indianapolis 500. So that was the story as the Friday gun went off and the track closed, and now it was time to go qualifying. Pole Day is coming up next here on Before the Green Flag Drops from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Celebrate with the winner of the Indy 500 on The Deuce. ESPN2 brings you live coverage of the Celebration Banquet Monday evening at 9:30 Eastern Time. We're recapping the month of May 1997 before the green flag drops on tomorrow's 81st Indianapolis 500. It's May 10th and pole day at the 500.
Mike Groff, the current IRL points leader, is the first to roll out, but it's a very cool day, only 60 degrees, tough to get tire temperature.
Mike Groff, 208.0, 208.7, 208.4, and 208.9, a very consistent run. The average 208.537 miles an hour.
Jeff Ward was the next out on the racetrack. Now, he was the first that did not have a guaranteed spot, which we talked so much about throughout the month of May.
Driving for Team Cheever, laps at 2:13, 2:14, and 2:15, averaged out to 2:14.157.
Then, of course, the run everyone was waiting for. He had been fastest every day leading up to qualifying. Arie Lyondike, G-Force, Aurora, Firestone tires. How fast would he go in these conditions? And, man, he used every inch of road.
Remember, he had been up over 220 miles an hour in the practice, but the 4-lap average during qualifying wasn't near that fast. 218.263 for the 90 winner.
But watch, this is typical Arie Lyondike driving here. He likes the car a little bit loose. He likes to go close to the walls. He really stood on it and thought, at least at this stage, that 218 would be good enough for the pole.
He did set a record, breaking the old normally aspirated qualifying mark set by Steve Chassie in 1985. That was 204.224, and Lyondike's 218 shattered that mark.
The official 4-lap average, 2:18.263, and they were very happy with that.
We talked to Arie Luyendyk after his run.
It was a good run, but I'm not really celebrating yet because around here, you know, you just never know. The guys from Menard might come out and just blow me away by a few miles an hour. You just don't know. Maybe they're not showing everything they have. I hope they do. I hope they have shown everything they have, but I'm just hoping it holds up this time.
Well, there were a lot more qualifiers to go, and Jim Guthrie was next to go out. And he, of course, won the race in Phoenix and so carries a bit of momentum to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
And this is a Dallara chassis. You can see the difference by the little winglet in front of the rear tire. And so he shook this thing out with a lot of horsepower in 2:15.2.
Jim Guthrie qualifying for his second Indianapolis 500 in excess of 215.
He, of course, was in the group of cars that was guaranteed a spot in the race, but still wanted to get the best spot he could.
And we also talked to Jim Guthrie after his successful qualification win.
Well, the car was actually probably the best it's been. Turn 1 is still a bit of a problem. Just can't do it flat yet. I don't know if it's me or the car, but everywhere else is pretty flat. Just let the car run. So hopefully a little more horsepower will be in good shape for the race.
Here's one of the Team Scandia cars, the rookie Vincenzo Sospiri we talked about earlier. The question was, could he knock Arie Luyendyk off the pole?
Now, of course, a lot of people were surprised by his initial speed, but they put a lot of downforce into this car, and it really performed well. Of course, he's on the Goodyear tires, and he was gunning for the Firestones up front.
He had one lap over 2:17. The others were in the 2:16 range, and the 4-lap average 216.822 for this driver who lives in Monte Carlo, Monaco. And we asked Vincenzo if he was nervous out there during his qualification run at Indianapolis.
No nervous. I was just getting the best concentration I could, and I haven't done it flat before now, but I knew I could do it. So I just went out, and the first corner was flat out. So I'm very happy I did it. I'm very happy for all my crew mechanics. They worked very hard, and they got me a car in the best shape as possible.
Here's a driver who has done so well in all of the Indy Racing League events. However, he has never won one. He started from the pole last year, Tony Stewart.
Tony Stewart, of course, and Team Menard waited till later in the day. 4:28 p.m. was when he rolled out. Of course, they had gone through a tire switch. They went to Goodyear's, but now they were back to Firestones, which they had tested so much.
First lap 2:17.9, second lap 2:17.8, third lap 2:18.1, and he was trying to get this car on the pole position but didn't do it. The fourth lap 2:18.161, average 2:18.021. How do you feel, Tony?
You know, second might as well be last to us. You know, we wanted to get the pole again, but you know, we're on the front row and that's not a bad starting spot, so we'll concentrate on the race.
Now we turn our attention to Robbie Gordon, who is the full-time stock car driver but has an intense desire to win the Indianapolis 500.
And of course, Robbie has been doing a lot of testing here. People wondered, Robbie Gordon, has he shown all the speed that he has here?
He had 3 laps in excess of 2:13. His final lap dropped down to below 2:13. The 4-lap average 213.211.
Certainly a disappointment for Robbie. People expected much more.
But again, he will try to compete in both races here at Indianapolis and in Charlotte tomorrow. Robbie Buell had taken the green flag twice for qualification runs and waved it off. So when he pulled onto the track this time, it was his third and final shot to get into the race.
And of course, it was very late in the day, 5:50 p.m. The track closing at 6. So he had ideal conditions, had a great shot at the pole, but just couldn't quite get enough out of this car.
This is Tony Stewart's teammate, and his laps were 2:15.5 and then 3 over 2:16, bringing the 4-lap average to 216.102. We talked to Robbie Buell after the qualifying effort.
That was our third qualifying attempt. Probably not the way you want to do things, but that's just the way it happened. excellent car. I think we got a great race car. The second attempt, actually, our first time by, was a pretty quick lap, and I mean, I was doing everything I could to get on the pole. I mean, that's what this team wants. That's what the whole Quaker State Glidden crew wants, is to be on the front row and be on the pole. And just ran it in hard into one, and she pushed up to the wall, and the next run of laps, our final attempt, we just had to get it in.
And as soon as he got off of the racetrack, it was time for the defending champion of the 500 to go on to the racetrack. This is Buddy Lazier.
Buddy, of course, had changed from Infinity Power to Aurora and got a lot of speed early. Of course, the car handles much different with the different power plant.
Last year, he started 5th and won the Indy 500. 4-lap average this year, 214.286.
About a 50-pound difference between the two engines. It was amazing how fast he was able to get it up to speed.
Not a particularly comfortable month so far for Buddy Lazier, but we'll wait for tomorrow. Here's what he had to say after qualifying.
The car was capable of running 217, but I had to use too much steering input. Anytime you have to steer that much, you slough a lot of speed. We should have been a bit quicker than we were, but on the last lap, I picked up a huge push and had to roll out of the throttle or we would have hit the wall. But we can trim. Now we can really go to work. We've only had a couple hours in this car. Really excited about spending this week getting ready for our race setup, and we'll be tough. We'll be real tough.
21 cars were in the field when the closing gun went off to end qualifications on pole day. Day 2 of qualifying coming up. We'll be back with more from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in a moment on Before the Green Flag Drops. At the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before the green flag drops as we review the month of May 1997 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I'm Bob Jenkins along with Jan Bika. So pole day is history. And for me, really not very many surprises. Probably Suspiri on the front row was my biggest surprise.
I think so. I think a lot of people were surprised, in particular by that run. Maybe Robbie Gordon not running as fast as people expected could be another surprise.
And so we set up for day 2, and quite frankly, it was a lot busier than we thought it would be. Steve Kinzer, the 14-time World of Outlaws Sprint Car champion who passed his driver's test back in 1981, had a crash, didn't compete, and really gave up on making the Indy 500, but here he is and qualifying at a very impressive average.
Dallara, Aurora Power, Goodyear tires. Didn't even expect to qualify on this day. Picked up a bit of debris there that had blown out of the grandstands, but it didn't slow him too much.
He had hoped so much for his father Bob to be here to watch him qualify. Of course, Steve learned how to race, so to speak, from his father Bob. They've been running the dirt tracks down in southern Indiana for many years, but this guy was very impressive given the fact that he hasn't had that much experience on pavement.
And of course, Owen Snyder was able to put this whole program together for him, and he was absolutely thrilled. Of course, this was a non-guaranteed spot, so he could potentially be in trouble for speed.
4-lap average, 210.793. Kinzer was in the show.
It's good to get this opportunity to do it. We was just so busy running our sprint car, we never really got to probably follow a dream that we wanted to be here. And it's just a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the IRL and everybody else for giving me this opportunity. It's I mean, I guess this is what it's all about. That's what they're trying to do, and it's just tickled to death.
Here's a guy that raised some eyebrows. Greg Ray, a rookie here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, had been running well. 214.813 on his first lap, 215.332 on the second lap, 215.5 on the third lap, and this is what happened.
No fuel pressure. They didn't have quite enough fuel in the car.
Let's go get back in line.
The crew is just devastated, but they didn't have time to get back in line.
That's right. They got to the back of the line, but time was running out. There was, however, time enough for Robbie Groff to go onto the speedway to try to qualify this car. Now, this was the 3rd attempt on this car, so he had to take it.
Now, he had brushed the wall in an earlier qualifying attempt, so for him, he wanted to hope that he could shake off the cobwebs, get back out there, and stand on it. Again, this was a guaranteed spot. He only had to run 203 miles an hour, and he did it easily.
Last pair of brothers to start in the Indy 500 were Gary and Tony Bettenhausen in '93. We have Robbie and Mike Groff in this year's lineup. His first lap was his fastest, 2:08.9. Then he dropped down on the 3 next laps, 2:07.4, 2:07.4, and a 2:07.3. 4-lap average for Robbie Groff, 207.792.
There's not too much nice about it, being down to your last strike. I mean, it feels like I was in the World Series, and you know, it was 2 outs last inning. It's just and down on my last strike. Yeah, it's not a real comforting feeling, but it's not the greatest speed in the world, that's for sure. And I surely would have hoped for better, but at this point, I mean, we just had to take whatever came that was over 203. And at least it was somewhat respectable, you know, about 4 miles an hour over 203, so that's good.
21 cars qualified on the first day, 2 more on the second day, so 23 were qualified on the first weekend. Lyondike, Stewart, and Suspiria in row number 1. This is the tentative grid after the first weekend of qualifying. Buell, Goodyear, and Guthrie in row number 2. The third row, Jeff Ward, Davey Hamilton, and Eliseo Salazar. The fourth row, defending champ Lazier, Eddie Cheever, and Robbie Gordon. The fifth row, Stefan Gregoire, Afonso Giafoni, and Kenny Breck. Row number 6, Lynn St. James, Buzz Calkins, and Dr. Jack Miller. In the seventh row, Alessandro Zampedri, Mike Groff, and Roberto Guerrero. Eighth row, Steve Kinzer and Robbie Groff. So those were the starters and the qualifiers at the end of weekend number 1 of qualifying for the 1997 Indianapolis 500. Jan and I will be back with more before the green flag drops in just a moment. On the eve of the greatest spectacle in racing, this is before the green flag drops prior to tomorrow's Indianapolis 500. Well, the second week of practice is always kind of interesting. There are some, of course, still searching for speed, but those that qualified are dialing in their cars for race day.
Yeah, of course, they're always looking for traffic to run in. They're trying to find out, how does my car perform on full fuel loads? How does it perform when I'm following another car? So, of course, the teammates have a tendency to team up together, find out what their car does, and, of course, Arie Luyendyk trying to take advantage of that along with the 2 Menard cars.
This was some of the greatest stuff we saw all month, and just an indication of what it is going to be like out there tomorrow with, of course, many, many more cars on the track.
The big concern was the fact that these cars only produce about half the downforce that they did last year. So what will the car do when you're following in traffic? And at first the drivers didn't like it at all, but later on they started to figure out the settings that were necessary.
They say that the start of the Indianapolis 500 is unlike anything else. There is a lot of air turbulence, and of course that's always the scariest time of any when the green flag does drop on the race. Now, when Scott Sharp was diagnosed with a small brain hemorrhage, he was ruled out of running in this year's 500. And so A.J. Foyt looked down the list and chose Johnny O'Connell as the substitute driver.
And, of course, Johnny, just a few days prior, was sitting right in this seat helping us here in the booth. Didn't have an idea that that ride was coming, but he was super excited to have the chance to drive that. But unfortunately, it was short-lived because he had an oil leak. Oil pouring out of the back of the car, gets onto the tires, and at this stage he's just a passenger. Heavy impact. The flash fire you see is the oil, thankfully no fuel, but Johnny was injured, unfortunately found himself in the hospital.
And so we move ahead now to the third day of time trials. Billy Boat, the former USAC Western States Midget champion, was here last year, crashed one of A.J. Foyt's cars. This year he's back with Foyt, and this time Boat put it in the show.
And a lot of people surprised by the kind of speed that he was able to turn, and this was the Dallara chassis, whereas we had seen crashes with Scott Sharp and Johnny O'Connell with a G-Force. So people were really feeling as though maybe the Dallara was easier to set up in a short period of time.
His laps varied from 2:14.4 to 2:16.2, average 2:15.5 for Billy Boat.
Well, the racetrack heated up just a little bit, and the Conseco Foyt Dallara was, you know, a little bit tight on the first couple laps, but you know, after it got a little bit of heat in the tires, it was just fantastic. You know, AJ's just done a great job of working with me, getting this car set up where I feel comfortable. It feels really good to make this race.
Here's a guy that grew up in Indianapolis, went to high school here, attended college here in Indianapolis, and he's been in the midget and Silver Crown ranks for the last few years. Tice Carlson, also here last year, didn't make the show. He is this year.
And two guys in a row that were subbing for the original drivers. Of course, he was going to, this car was going to be piloted by John Paul Jr., who had leg injuries. Tice Carlson gets the chance and has a pretty strong performance. But again, it was a guaranteed spot. He only really had to run 2:03.
And the laps varied from 2:10, rather, to 2:12. Average 2:10.8 for Tice Carlson.
I looked up at the pylon, and the first lap was a good lap, probably the fastest that we've gone all month. The car started getting a little bit of push to it, but hey, we're in the Indianapolis 500, and I'm so pleased right now.
Mark Dismore, a sophomore here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, qualified at 2:12.423 for Kelly Automotive Group. This is a Dallara Aurora.
Goodyear tires, you could see that they were brand new. A lot of guys qualifying on what they call sticker tires. And this was a bit disappointing for Dismore because he was the fastest car on the racetrack in the morning practice.
After he qualified, he signed autographs for 2.5 hours for the race fans. Sam Schmidt was preparing to put in the second Blueprint car into the race. This was also a Dallara Aurora.
Blueprint Racing using NAC engines. Of course, people feel that these cars have a lot of horsepower after that Phoenix victory, and he put it to pretty good use.
216.159, 214.7, 214.4, and 215.1. Average 215.141 for Sam Schmidt. And with those two cars in the race, Blueprint Racing decided they would go with a third car, and they named Claude Bourbonnais to drive it.
But unfortunately, he was just getting up to speed coming here off of turn number 2. You can see he's already high. He's out of the groove. And unfortunately, he's trying to turn the car at this particular phase. But the thing just continues to drift higher and higher on the racetrack until finally he smacks it. Pretty hard impact. But the amazing thing about this was he never really hit the brakes and drove it at pretty much full speed back to pit lane.
And there would be more heard from Bourbonnais as the weekend progressed. But there you can see the outcome of what happened to him on Saturday. But the car was fixed, and we'll tell you more about what he did and what happened on the fourth and final day, Bubble Day, when we come back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Before the green flag drops, we're previewing the 1997 Indianapolis 500 from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So we come to the fourth and final day of time trials, and there are just 2 spots remaining open in the 33-car field.
And it was very exciting setting up what was going to happen on Bubble Day. 2 spots, like you say, 3 or 4 cars with enough speed to get in, but some were exempt and some weren't. Set up a really nice day and exciting day for Bubble Day.
Johnny Enzer had worked out a deal with Ron Himmelgarn, and so he jumped into a third car from the stable and attempted to reach speed to get into his second 500-mile race. He was in last year's event, but really didn't turn a competitive lap because he had transmission problems on the pace lap.
Now, a very curious decision from the team owner, Ron Himmelgarn, not to take the exemption on this car, which fueled speculation that possibly they would start more than the 33. Of course, this is an Infinity power plant for Unser.
Laps varied from 207.8 to 210.2, and the 4-lap average for Johnny Enzer, 209.344. Now, remember Greg Ray, how he ran out of fuel after 3 very good laps? Well, he tried it again on the fourth and final day.
He had ideal weather conditions. He had run very fast in the practice, and this time they were definitely sure they were full on fuel. In fact, I think they may have run this car on a full tank.
Well, the speed was certainly less than what he achieved on the previous try, but nevertheless a good qualifying average for Greg Ray, who comes from Plano, Texas. The 4-lap average 213.760 miles an hour. And so the 33-car field was full, and I think that in itself was something that a lot of people didn't think would happen.
No, I think that is true, Bob. There obviously was not a whole lot of cars here that if we had problems, there may not have been a full field. There were engine-related problems, but you know, by the time you got to Bubble Day, there were definitely still cars left, fast ones, and it made it exciting certainly at the end.
A lot of deals being made, and Paul Paul Durant had been hanging around A.J. Foyt's garage nearly all month, and finally on the 4th day, he got into one of A.J.'s cars and successfully qualified for the 500.
Paul Durant, like you said, with very, very little practice time, hopped into this car. This was, of course, one of these preferred or exempt positions, so he only had to run 203. Did well better than that.
209.149, and with that we had our first car bumped out of the race, and the one bumped out was Alessandro Zampedri, who qualified on the first weekend. Here's Claude Bourbonnais. Now, we saw him hit the wall the previous day, but repairs were made to the car, and Claude tried to get into his first 500.
The team worked all night. I think they got 1 or 2 hours sleep at most. They borrowed a gearbox from Jonathan Bird, and he got it up to speed and bumped his way in. Indeed he did. As a matter of fact, he bumped out Johnny Unser, who had just bumped Zampedri. Bourbonnais' 4-lap average was 210.523 for the Canadian, and a third Blueprint Racing car was in the field. But then Zampedri got in his backup car and tried to bump his way back into the field. But look at the skies here. Dick Simon and team owner Andy Evans decided to wait till the last possible moment before the rain showers were coming. And you can see on the lens, it was actually raining here on his final lap.
On that final lap, he dropped down to 209.9 from his best lap of 213.088. But nevertheless, Alessandro Zampedri, who crashed on the final lap here, qualified at 211.757, and he was back in the race, and he bumped out Lynn St. James. Now, here's more deals being made. Scott Harrington needed to get into the 500, and he made a deal with A.J. Foyt.
They had an oil leak. You can see that both of the crews working together, A.J. looking on. They fixed the oil leak, and he did have a shot.
This was the car that practiced as the number 14T during the month, and Scott Harrington, late in the afternoon on final qualifying day, went out to try to put this car in the show and make his second 500.
And he was flying at this stage, but the back stepped out on him. He hit the wall very hard on the outside of turn number 2. They went just a little bit too far on the setup. He thought he needed more speed than he did, and a really just a sad ending to what was a great effort.
And so at that point, we had 33 cars in the lineup and 2 bumped out. But then there was a dramatic announcement just after the track closed at 6 o'clock Indianapolis time from the executive director of the Indy Racing League, Leo Mell, concerning this year's starting field.
We're going to start 35 cars in the Indianapolis 500 this year. We had 2 cars bumped out who had done 4-lap qualifying, and we must start the fastest 33 cars.
Well, certainly there is argument on both sides. Yes, they are starting the 33 fastest cars plus 2 more, but there's a lot of people that don't agree with breaking the tradition here.
Well, you know, there is tradition. There's also the aspect that people were concerned about the timing of that decision, because we saw Alessandro Zampedri, we saw Scott Harrington take big risks to try and get in the field when they found out that maybe, in fact, they wouldn't have had to take that kind of a risk. So I think now time has passed. We are going to have 35 starters. So that's done. Let's go racing. There's more cars, and away we go.
That's right. And it's not unprecedented, because we did have 35 starters back in the 70s. So what did some of the drivers and car owners think about the decision?
As an owner, I think it's probably a really good idea, especially if I was in that situation, and I almost was. As a driver, it's one of those, it's a rule, and when you say 33 cars, it's 33 cars. So I got mixed emotions like everybody else. I guess we're going to find out next Sunday how good or bad it was.
I haven't looked in the history books, but I believe that the 33 fastest cars have always started here. Well, the 33 fastest cars are starting here on Sunday also. But they're, due to all that confusion with that rule that I'm very glad they got rid of, they've added another 2.
I think it's one of those things that you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And, you know, it's a tough decision whichever way you do it. And, you know, I wasn't sure what was going on with the decision-making process, but I'm sure they came up with a good reason why they had to do what they did, and so I support it for that.
And so with the end of qualifying and the 35-car field set for the 81st running of the 500, the track went quiet until Thursday and so-called Carburation Day. We'll be back with that story and more in just a moment. We're on the eve of the greatest race in the world, the Indianapolis 500. This is before the green flag drops. I'm Bob Jenkins along with Jan Beekes. Now, the final week before the race, well, it allows the drivers a little time to take a breather. Some of them even go home for a couple of days, but others stick around here.
Yeah, obviously there's golfing activities, go-karting activities, and so on, but really they're getting ready for Carburation Day. Now, the guys, the veterans that had a lot of testing running during the week between the two qualifying weekends, they're not too concerned. But those guys who put it in at the last minute, qualifying day is going to be, or I should say Carb Day, is going to be very, very important.
Of course, they don't run carburetors anymore. It's better called Final Practice from 11 to 1 on Thursday.
Generally takes the longest. That's how sometimes you can tell. Looks like Gallus might be ahead.
And there's Breck out of the box, and yeah, with a good jump. It looks like Breck has won this thing rather handily.
The team is one of the best there is. Not only did you make them happy, you just made them $40,000 richer. Go celebrate with. I will. Maybe they buy me a beer now.
ESPN Speed World coverage of Before the Green Flag Drops has been brought to you by Original Coors, pure and simple, the last real beer. And so here now is the starting lineup for the 81st running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race tomorrow. On the pole, his second pole position of his career, Arie Luyendyk, now making his home in Scottsdale, Arizona. He qualified at G-Force Aurora on Firestones at 218.263 miles an hour. In the middle of the front row, car number 2, Tony Stewart from Rushville, Indiana, the Glidden Menard Special, G-Force Aurora. And on the outside of row number 1, a rookie, Vincenzo Sospiri, car number 8, the Old Navy Scandia Alta XL.
On the inside of row number 2, Robbie Buell, of course, he's the teammate to Arie Luyendyk, I should say, the teammate to Tony Stewart on the middle of the front row. In the middle of the second row is Scott Goodyear. There's the teammate to Arie Luyendyk, 2 teammates in row 1 and row 2. And on the outside, the big surprise from Phoenix, Jim Guthrie, hoping he'll come through with another big victory.
In the third row will be Jeff Ward, who out-qualified his owner, Eddie Cheever. Jeff, in the First Plus Team Cheever car, qualified at 214.5. The middle of the third row will be Davey Hamilton in one of A.J. Foyt's cars, number 14 at G-Force Aurora. And the outside of row number 3, Eliseo Salazar in the Kopec Crystal Scandia, car number 7.
Inside row number 4, the defending champion, Buddy Lazier. He now has Aurora power. He started with Infinity power. He likes this better, likes his chances to go to the front. In the middle of that row, Eddie Cheever. Of course, he's the team owner, as we talked about before, for Jeff Ward. He'll be hoping to follow Jeff through the early stages of the race. And Robbie Gordon, a bit disappointed in his qualifying speed, but of course, he's always fast. But he says speed won't win this one.
Here's row number 5, Stefan Gregoire, the only veteran in this row, car number 77, a G-Force Aurora. The middle of row number 5, another rookie, Alfonso Giafoni from Brazil. This is a Dallara Aurora car. And on the outside of row number 5, rookie Kenny Breck, originally from Sweden, driving the Monsoon Gallus Racing G-Force Aurora.
On the inside of row 6, Buzz Calkins, of course, the co-champion of the series last year. On the middle of row number 6, the doctor, the racing dentist, Jack Miller. On the outside of that row, the current point leader in the Indy Racing League, Mike Groff, as we talked about before, both he and his brother getting to race in the 500.
Row number 7, a driver who has finished 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th down through the years. He's looking to finish first. Roberto Guerrero in the Pennzoil Pagan Dallara Infinity. Rookie Steve Kinzer, the king of the Outlaws, starts in the middle of row number 7. He qualified at over 210 miles an hour. And then Robbie Groff, the brother of Mike, another rookie here at the Speedway. He clocked in at 207.7.
Inside of row number 8, Billy Boat driving for A.J. Foyt. It's a Dallara with Aurora power and Goodyear tires. He's looking to take A.J. to the front as Sam Schmidt is hoping to take Blueprint Racing to the front. Another Dallara Aurora, but this time with Firestone tires. On the outside, Billy Rowe, a rookie coming from the outside of row 8.
And on the inside of row number 9, a couple of local drivers. Mark Dismore hails from Greenfield, Indiana, in the Kelly Automotive Group Dallara Aurora. The middle of row number 9, the short track star Tice Carlson, rookie here at the Speedway. The car number is 18. It's a Dallara Aurora. And Marco Greco is on the outside of row number 9. The car number is 22. It is also a Dallara Aurora.
Inside of row number 10, Dennis Vitolo kind of started the wars here of the toothpaste companies. We have Crest on Jack Miller, Aquafresh on this car, adding something new to the Speedway. Fermin Velez driving for Team Scandia, Old Navy in the middle of row number 10. And on the outside, of course, the great success story, I guess you would say, for Greg Ray, got into the race, this time with enough fuel.
Row number 11 on the inside, Alessandro Zampedri in the MyJack Scandia Alta XL, the Dallara Aurora. The middle of row number 11, the Canadian Claude Bourbonnais, car number 72. This is the Blueprint Jacuzzi Armor Golf Dallara Aurora. Outside row number 11, in the Conseco AJ Foyt Racing, car number 1, Paul Durant. It's a G-Force Aurora.
And in row number 12, of course, the two drivers that were added to this field, Lynn St. James at 210.145 after being bumped from the field, as well as Johnny Unser. He was bumped, then reinstated. Obviously, the last row of drivers very, very excited to have a shot.
So there you have the 35 drivers who will take the green flag at approximately 11 o'clock Indianapolis time tomorrow morning for the 81st running of the 500. It's going to be great.
I think it will be. Obviously, we have more cars. Obviously, there's always a lot of action here, and no one really knows exactly what to expect, but it's always fun to watch.
And we thank you very much for joining us here this evening for this preview of tomorrow's running of the race. And a reminder once again that the race can be seen over on ABC with coverage beginning at 10 o'clock Indianapolis time. That is 11 o'clock